Hello, fellow believers. It's great to see you. I am Jung-woo Lee. At this time, we will study God's Word together. The title is Introductory Lesson 16, The Figurative Sea, Fisherman, Net, Fish, and Ship. First, let's read together the main reference verse, Matthew chapter 13, verses 47 and 48, and find out why we must learn these words. Once again, the kingdom of heaven is like a net that was let down into the sea, and caught all kinds of fish. When it was full, the fishermen pulled it up on the shore. Then they sat down and collected the good fish in baskets, but threw the bad away. Yes, this was a parable of Jesus, spoke 2,000 years ago, in which he used the natural creations of the world to tell us the spiritual secrets of God. Let's look more closely at the principle of nature that Jesus used to explain heaven. He said in Matthew chapter 13, verse 47 and 48, "The kingdom of heaven is like a net that was let down into the sea and caught all kinds of fish, and that the good fish were collected in baskets, but the bad ones were thrown away." So then, he is explaining to us what the kingdom of heaven is by telling us this parable about fishing, right? Then we must correctly perceive through the Bible regarding the parable of the sea, fish, net, how the good and bad fish are separated, and the basket that only the good fish are taken to, so that all of us can reach heaven and salvation by acting according to God's will. Now then, we should find out the reality of these contents, right? What are the realities of the parable of the sea, fisherman, net, fish, and ship? To tell you the answer first, the sea is the world. The fisherman is a pastor. The net is the word. A fish is a person. And we can say that the ship is a church. Let's confirm these one by one using the Bible and see why these are the answers. Please listen carefully so we can clearly perceive the realities of these parables. First, we will look into the parable of the sea. We must first think of the physical characteristics of the sea. What kinds of characteristics does it have? The sea is where many waters are gathered, right? The place where many waters are gathered, where different kinds of fish live, is the sea. Even though there is plenty of water, can a person drink it? No, we can't use it for drinking, and we cannot wash ourselves with it either. With these physical characteristics in mind, what is the figurative sea? First, let's think about who lives in the sea according to the Bible. If we take a look in Psalm chapter 74, verse 13 and on, it says, "It was you who split open the sea by your power. You broke the heads of the monster in the waters. It was you who crushed the heads of the Leviathan." Through these words, we can understand that the monster and Leviathan, or dragon, live in the sea. Also, in Isaiah chapter 27, verse 1, "In that day the Lord will punish with his sword, his fierce, great and powerful sword, Leviathan, the gliding serpent, Leviathan, the coiling serpent. He will slay the monster of the sea." We can perceive through the Bible that the monster and the serpent live in the sea. Even in the folklores of the world, it is said that a dragon king lives in the sea. But is there really a dragon that lives in the sea? That's probably not the case, right? Let's have a correct understanding according to the Bible. What are the monster and serpent that live in the sea? Revelation chapter 12, verse 9 says, "The great dragon was hurled down, that ancient serpent called the devil, or Satan, who leads the whole world astray." So then, the dragon and serpent are not a physical dragon and serpent, but they refer to Satan, the devil. I hope we can all perceive this. Then, the sea where the devil lives can't be a physical sea either, right? Then, what kind of sea is it? There is a scene that the prophet Daniel saw in a vision. If we look at Daniel chapter 7, verse 3, prophet Daniel sees 4 beasts coming out of the sea. Because he was curious, Daniel asks an angel of God about the true meaning of this. The explanation of the sea is given in verse 17. It is given by a messenger of the Lord. Let's read it. The 4 great beasts are 4 kingdoms that will rise from the earth. Now the explanation is given from the words that we just read. The 4 beasts that come out of the sea are the 4 kingdoms, and they will rise from the earth. Then the sea is the earth, the world, right? Let's learn more details about what kind of earth it is by looking at Revelation chapter 17, verse 1. According to its content, it says that the great prostitute sits on many waters and that she will be punished. The many waters can also be called the sea, right? We will first find out who this prostitute is, and we will also understand the reality of the many waters, the sea. In the Bible, a woman is referred to as a pastor who receives the seed from the Spirit, meaning the Word, and who preaches it. However, as she is described as a prostitute, it would mean that a pastor who was supposed to receive God's seed receives Satan's seed instead and testifies about it, meaning this pastor testifies to lies, the false truth. Therefore, this prostitute is not referring to a pastor of God, but a false pastor of Satan. I hope we can all perceive this. If this is so, then we can understand that this prostitute is in control of the many waters that she is sitting on. Then what are the many waters, the sea, this false pastor of Satan is sitting on at the time of the end? It can't be physical water, right? If we look at verse 15, it says that the waters where the prostitute sits are peoples, multitudes, nations, and languages. So the many waters, the sea, are not referring to the physical sea, but they refer to a place where many peoples, multitudes, nations, and languages are gathered together. If we were to draw a picture for us to understand further, we learned that the prostitute is a false pastor whom the dragon, Satan, the devil, is with. The many waters this false pastor is sitting on is not physical water. They are peoples, multitudes, nations, and languages, an organization where many people are gathered, right? Why? People use the natural principles of the world and use the phrase mountains of people or a massive sea of people. So, people are expressed as the sea. Also, when many people gather somewhere, they say waves of people are coming in. It's an expression to show that many people are gathering like the waves of the sea. Ultimately, people are expressed as many waters. So even in the Bible, the many waters that the prostitute is sitting on, the peoples, multitudes, nations, and languages, are under the control of Satan's false pastor. They are the world, the organizations of many people. Then what kind of place is the sea? It's true, because Satan lives in the sea, we can say that it is the world of religion that Satan, the devil, has a hold of. Does this make sense? So then, what is the seawater? Because Satan is controlling the sea and his false pastor is there, the seawater is Satan's false truth. I hope you perceive that the seawater is the false truth of Satan. Now, let's find out the reality of the sea. We can find out the reality of the sea from the prophecies of the Old Testament that were fulfilled at the time of the first coming. Regarding the reality of the sea, it says in Ezekiel chapter 47, verses 8 and 9, that water flows out of the temple, and when it reaches the sea, its waters are healed. Then this sea can't be physical, right? This sea needs to be healed, so isn't it a spiritual sea? Let's find out the reality of the sea using Matthew chapter 23, verse 33. Jesus called the Pharisees and the teachers of the law the false pastors of Satan and called them snakes. The false pastors of Satan were the Pharisees and the teachers of the law, and the world they were controlling was the world of Judaism, right? Therefore, we can know that the reality of the sea was the world of Judaism. I hope you can understand that it was the sea that was to be healed. As the Old Testament prophecy of Ezekiel chapter 48, 8 and 9 is explained when it says that water flows out of the temple, Jesus, who was the temple of God during the first coming, spread the word of truth. And the disciples who received the word of truth became the river which appeared according to God's word. And wherever the disciples testified to the word becomes the place where people are reborn with God's word, right? Therefore, this sea, Judaism, at the time of the first coming, was what was healed through the words of testimony from Jesus' disciples. And the healing of the sea means people who were born of the false truth of Judaism were completely reborn with the word of truth that Jesus testified to, as water covered the sea of the false truth. Does this make sense? I hope you can clearly understand that the sea at the time of the first coming was the world of Judaism. Then what kind of place is the sea at the time of the second coming? We can find out from the New Testament prophecies as they become reality when they are fulfilled. It says in a prophecy of the New Testament, in Revelation chapter 22, verses 1 and 2, "Then the angel showed me the river of the water of life, as clear as crystal, flowing from the throne of God and of the Lamb, down the middle of the great street of the city. On each side of the river stood the tree of life, bearing 12 crops of fruit, yielding its fruit every month, and the leaves of the tree are for the healing of the nations." Then we can see that there are nations to be healed at the time of the end. Then all nations become the sea, right? Then what kind of place is the reality of the sea? The prostitute in Babylon, and as according to Revelation chapter 18, verses 2 and 3, the world of false truth under the control of the prostitute becomes a home for demons, the kingdom of Satan, and the prostitute makes all the nations fall with the maddening wine of her adulteries, which is the false truth, the seawater. So then, all nations that fall become the sea, and the place that needs to be healed, right? Then I hope we can all perceive through the Bible that at the time of the second coming, this place is referring to the world of religion, Christianity that the false pastors of Satan take control over. So the sea at the time of the first coming was Judaism, and the sea in today's era is the Church of Jesus, Christianity. Then how will all nations be healed? This can be understood from understanding the parable of the fisherman, net, fish, and ship. How does God heal the sea that needs to be healed? Heaven is explained through physical fishermen casting a net and catching fish, then taking them to a ship. As we understand this spiritually, first we'll take a look at Matthew chapter 4, verses 18 and 19. A fisherman appears there, and he's a fisher of men, right? Jesus tells his disciples to follow him, and that they will be made into fishers of men. Then, did they really become fishers who physically catch men like fish? No, but rather they preached the word and evangelized, right? Therefore, a fisher can be called a pastor who evangelizes with the word. So a fisher is a pastor. Then what kind of net does this pastor use to catch what kind of fish? Let's get the answers from Habakkuk chapter 1, verses 14 and 15. You have made men like fish in the sea, like sea creatures that have no ruler. The wicked foe pulls all of them up with hooks. He catches them in his net. He gathers them up in his dragnet, and so he rejoices and is glad. Yes, from what we've just read, God referred to men as fish. And it says that men, like fish, are caught with a net. But how can we catch people? Not with physical nets, right? When a pastor testifies about the word to evangelize people, the word is a net. So, a fisherman casting a net to catch fish is like a pastor preaching the word, like a net, to evangelize people who are like fish. And when people are evangelized and taken to a ship, it means that they are guided to the church that the pastor is leading them to, right? Therefore, a ship can be called a church. As we now understand that a ship is a church, we can also perceive the words written in Revelation chapter 18, verses 17 through 19. Because a ship is a church, there are also captains and those who travel by the sea, the sailors. What do they refer to? We can say that the captain who is in control of the ship is the pastor of the church, right? Then who are the sailors? They refer to the evangelists and people who work for the church, who work with the pastor. And those who travel by the sea, the passengers, are the congregation members of the church. This makes sense, right? Now we can understand the meaning of fisherman, net, fish, and ship within the Bible, right? But the reason that we are learning this isn't to learn the meanings of these words, but it is to understand the kingdom of heaven that Jesus spoke about through these parables, right? By perceiving the kingdom of heaven explained through the parable of catching fish, I hope we can all become believers who completely perceive these words and enter into heaven. If we look at Matthew chapter 13, verses 47 through 50, Jesus said that the net is let down into the sea, and only the good fish were collected into the baskets and guided to heaven. Let's find out more through this illustration and find out the true meaning. Heaven is explained with the parable of the fisherman casting a net into the sea, catching all kinds of fish, and putting the good into a basket. What does this mean? What is the sea? It's the world of Satan. This is the world of religion. God sends a true pastor, a fisherman, and he casts a net of heaven to catch the many believers who are living in the world of religion, full of false truth, and guides them to his church. Then the net is the word of heaven that the true pastor testifies to, right? So the net is the word of heaven. And what is caught with this net? Many kinds of fish are caught in this net, and the many kinds of fish refer to the believers in different denominations. This makes sense, right? So what does it mean that a net is cast to catch fish? It means that a pastor of God preaches the word of heaven and evangelizes to many believers in different religions. That is what we can perceive. It also says that only the good fish will be taken to the basket, a bowl, and the bad are thrown away. What does this mean? When it says only the good fish are taken to the basket, it means only those who hear the words of heaven and perceive and believe in those words are the ones who will attend the church that the pastor of God leads. So, such people are the righteous who believe in the words of heaven in the last days. When it says that the bad fish are thrown away, it means that out of all people who hear the word, those whose hearts are not changed, those who do not have good hearts when God sees them, will be thrown back out to the world. Thus, such people are not the righteous, but they are those who are evil. Matthew chapter 13, verses 49 and 50 say, "This is how it will be at the end of the age. The angels will come and separate the wicked from the righteous, and throw them into the fiery furnace, where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth." This means the events in the last days are explained through this parable of catching fish, aren't they? It means that God will send a true pastor to evangelize by preaching the words of heaven for all the believers of the world to be guided to the church of heaven of God. Then anyone who is caught in the net of heaven and taken to the ship is a person who is guided to heaven from the world. And anyone who leaves the word, even after being caught in it, and does not listen to the word, but remains in the sea, is the one who does not enter into the kingdom of heaven, and is someone who is not saved. This is what is explained through the parable of catching fish. Fellow believers whose hope is in heaven, we must follow the words of promise. If it says that casting a net in the sea and catching fish, which are taken to a ship, is the kingdom of heaven, then we must be able to distinguish through these words of promise how we can go to heaven. That is, by being caught in the net of heaven, which is cast into the world of false truth, or remaining in the sea by not being caught in the net. I hope we can all become believers of God, whom God acknowledges as we act according to His will. So God and Jesus said that the last days will be like the time of Noah. Let's read Matthew chapter 24, verses 37 through 39, and have a time of perceiving why the end of the age will be like the time of Noah. As it was in the days of Noah, so it will be at the coming of the Son of Man. For in the days before the flood, people were eating and drinking, marrying and giving in marriage, up to the day Noah entered the ark, and they knew nothing about what would happen until the flood came and took them all away. That is how it will be at the coming of the Son of Man. Why did Jesus say that the coming of the Son of Man is like the days of Noah? As we think about this, isn't it true that there was salvation for the people only if they got on Noah's ark? If they did not get on the ark, they would all receive destruction. At the time of Noah, Noah received God's command and built the ark. And even though Noah cried out to people to get on the ark for more than 100 years, those who were under the sin of Adam did not listen to Noah's words, and were eating and drinking, marrying and giving in marriage. They ended up not being saved because they did not get on the ark when the flood came. Such things become warnings and examples for today, at the time of the second coming, right? That is why Jesus said that today's era is like the days of Noah. Then how will this work today? A pastor whom God is with casts the net of heaven, the words of heaven, from the church of God. He casts the net to the believers of different denominations who are under false truth and evangelizes them in order for them to be guided to the ark of heaven. But if one is not caught in the net and remains in the world, the sea, then such a person is only carrying out a life of faith that leads him to hell, not heaven, right? Fellow believers, isn't it true that at the time of harvest, one must be harvested from the field by listening to the words of the harvesters, the angels, to become wheat-like believers who are taken to the barn? In the same way, one must be caught in the net of heaven that the pastor of heaven testifies to in the last days. And he must be guided by following his words to the church where the pastor of God is. Then he can be called a person of heaven, whom God acknowledges at the time of the end. Fellow believers, is clearly testifying that it is the ark of heaven of today, just like the time of Noah. Anyone who follows the words of promise and believes and keeps those words will get on this ark of heaven. Believers, please perceive how God is guiding us to salvation, to heaven in these last days by hearing the words of the new covenant of the Bible, so you can get on this ark of heaven to receive salvation as true believers. Now, I will organize the core points of the lesson. We wanted to learn about the Figurative Sea. What was the sea? It is Satan's world, the world of religion. A fisherman who casts a net in the sea is a pastor and an evangelist of God who evangelizes with God's word. And what is the net that the pastor casts? It is the word of heaven, the revealed doctrine. The fish that are caught in the net are the believers of different denominations who are in the sea, in the world of false truth. They must hear the words of heaven and be taken to the ship that the true pastor guides them to. And that ship is the church of God from the world, meaning the kingdom of heaven. I hope all of you will completely perceive these words and be caught by the net of heaven, the words of heaven, and become the people of heaven by being taken to the ship. Next time, we will go over Introductory Lesson 17 and learn about the figurative beast. The Bible tells us the difference between a man and a beast. A person whom God acknowledges is referred to as a person, a man, and a beast-like person whom God does not acknowledge is referred to as a beast. And as it says in the Bible that a beast comes out of the sea, we will perceive, through the words of the Bible, where this beast from the sea goes to and what it does. I hope everyone can perceive these words and become those who receive salvation and be people whom God is with. We'll end here today. Please write these words that are given to you in your heart. I hope you all become believers who fulfill the hope of heaven. Thank you. If one does not know the secrets of heaven, the parables, he will not be forgiven and will become a person on the outside. This era is not the era of speaking figuratively, but the era of knowing plainly. This is the time of harvest. Those who are harvested are the sons of the kingdom of heaven. Those who are not harvested and who remain in their churches are the sons of the devil. Let us become those who are saved by believing according to what is promised.